Dear beautiful people, welcome back to the Mastery series. What I'm trying to talk about now is quite challenging to put into words, because there's a multi-dimensionality to it. And those of us who like simple answers often do so because we might feel overwhelmed or intimidated by a greater range of information. Now, sometimes when you read statements of certain spiritual teachers, they seem to be contradicting, but in truth they are not contradicting. It depends on from what level of intelligence does the statement come from. Because in all that is, in all that exists in the universe and in other universes and beyond the universe and so on, there are layers to experience. Now, a spiritual teacher might answer you from the level of person. He might answer you from the level of soul. Or he might answer you from the level of I am, which is the deepest possible realization. So you see, there's already several layers from which a teacher could answer you. And what layer a teacher would pick intuitively is what would serve the being that he's talking to the most. I'll give you an example. Sometimes I have clients where I have a person-to-person conversation, because this is what serves them right now. Sometimes I speak from a level of deeper intelligence, which is a representation of who I am on another level of existence, because this is appropriate right now. Sometimes I might, in that sense, present a channel. That means I let someone else talk through me, because this is at that time appropriate. And whatever is appropriate in that moment happens. Whatever is of service happens. Now, let's speak about the most difficult concept that humans have created, the illusion of evil. Well, you see the tyrants in human history, the dictators, the manipulators, those entities who try to gain control over a vast amount of the population. Many of you might struggle to go beyond the idea that they are evil. And from the perspective of human, you're not wrong in your perception, but it is a limited perception. For those who want to attain mastery, they need to go beyond the idea of good and evil. So let's start small, and then we try to tackle the topics of higher complexity. When a tiger goes for the hunt and he tries to catch a deer, he does so because he's hungry, and maybe he wants to feed his cubs, right? So when the tiger can't catch the deer, the tiger feels subjectively it's bad. If the tiger catches the deer, the tiger will feel it's subjectively good. From the perspective of the deer, if it's been caught by the tiger, it will feel it's subjectively bad. It will be afraid. If it can escape, it will feel a relief, so it will experience it is subjectively good. So you can see, if the tiger can't catch the deer, he's suffering. If the deer can't escape, it's suffering. Right? But they're acting from their perspective, from their relative perspective, what they need in that moment. And this dynamic, in that sense, is not evil. Neither is the tiger evil, right, for trying to catch the deer, because that's the nature of the tiger. Nor is the deer evil if it is escaping and the tiger has to go hungry. So you see, whatever form you have, from the subjective perspective of the form, there's right and wrong. So for example, same applies to you. If you can get food, you feel it's good, right? If your house is warm, you feel it's good. If it's cold, you feel, oh, something is off. I should find a way of heating my place, right? So this is the level of instinct where the form dictates your perception. All right. But now life has become more complex because you've taken on a human body. So the old instinctive ways do not apply anymore. Now, most human beings act from the level of consciousness where they're at right now. So they can only act from the knowing that they have access to the dimensions of understanding that they have access to right now. And because the understanding might be limited, they may cause great suffering. Right? That does not make them evil, that simply in that moment makes them ignorant. But I'm not saying it as a judgment. Because I have often experienced ignorance before because I had a limited understanding. Right? So every one of us experiences ignorance. There's nothing evil about it. I'll give you an example. I have a cat who is very, very loving. He's very aware. You know, he looks at your eyes, you look back, and then there's a great awareness of love, of connection. Right? Very conscious for an animal. Surprisingly intelligent. Now, but there's a moment where he cannot stay aware. When his instincts are triggered, for example. See, this animal is so intelligent that he would sleep in my arm. I can even cover him up to his neck with the blanket. He will hug me with his foot and will look into my eyes, yeah, and you can feel the love. He's fully aware of the love and the interrelation. But if in that moment he would hear a bang outside, yeah, some noise he's not familiar with, he will get scared, and suddenly he starts running while I'm holding him in my arm. And what will a cat do instinctively when they want to get away from something? They will use their claws because it gives them more grip. So he is running, basically using my body for traction. Subjectively speaking, it's pretty painful. All right. But in that moment where he injures this body, for example, he doesn't do it consciously because his instinct is triggered and he's not capable of having another response to the situation. So what he does is not evil, but there's a lack of awareness in that moment. When he stops being afraid, he becomes aware again. Very interesting. One could say it's the same with people, you see. When they're afraid, they lose a great portion of awareness because now they are operating from instinct, which is a great limitation. And suddenly they're trapped in the idea of good and evil, right? Subjectively good, subjectively bad, and so on. Which is the perspective of ego, it's the perspective of limitation. To say what I subjectively perceive as comfortable is good and what I subjectively perceive as uncomfortable is bad. And now the projection happens. The ego will project it on every situation. Right? The ego cannot take the perspective of another being. Yeah? It doesn't have the empathy or the compassion to do so. It's a limitation in that moment. Now, to transcend our limitations is, of course, part of the spiritual practice. Now, most people cause suffering because of a lack of awareness, in that sense ignorance, but there's something innocent about it. They're learning through the act of creation. That means through their beliefs they create a world, and the world is being mirrored back to them. And if they then become conscious of what they have created, they can choose to create differently. But they need to have a manifestation first, and this is often learning through pain. So something that I'm unconscious about, it will meet me in life as another person who's on the same energy frequency of what I am unconscious of, and it will mirror it back to me. And if this is unpleasant, well, I might want to reflect why this is unpleasant for me, right? So integrate that. Gain a deeper understanding, and then I can reflect, do I want to keep creating that, or do I want to create something else? So, in every movie you have watched about heroes and villains, you come to an understanding that there is a drama, where the drama is, of course, the narrative is the story, right? And the story has an arc of tension, a confrontation, and then a drop of the arc of tension. But what you see is that the hero and the villain interact. And through the interaction they create identity. So what we perceive as evil is often there to make us more aware. If you think, for example, about a movie like Star Wars, would the character in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, would he know himself without Darth Vader? Is not Darth Vader the manifestation of his shadow consciousness that he doesn't want to integrate or admit it's there? There's this scene where he meets his master, right? on this wilderness planet, this little alien master, and the master says, you go there into the dark cave, but you don't need any weapon. Don't go in there with a weapon. And then he sees his shadow projection in front of him, attacking him in the form of Darth Vader, and he strikes it down. The helmet breaks and he sees his own face. So he's basically killed himself. So what we are unconscious of, we created, because we create what we are conscious and unconscious of at the same time. Your beliefs create your own reality. So when you love, you create love as a mirror reflection. Where when you dislike and hate, you create that as well. And often we might not want to admit what we dislike, what we disapprove of, right? Or what we judge, because that's what about it. It's the judgment. And what we judge, we create as well. And then we try to eliminate it in what we perceive as the external world, but it is within ourselves. So, in order to have a choice when you're unaware, you need someone to give you that choice. And this is the act of co-creation. For example, if in that sense, in this lifetime, you would face someone that you perceive as a villain, they might make you conscious of your own sovereignty. So from a higher dimensional level, when you look at it, they would serve your soul. Subjectively, you would feel very uncomfortable about them and maybe even angry or experience a sense of helplessness or loss of control. But that's the ego's perspective. See, when there is a tyrant, he shows you one polarity. This polarity is separation. He acts from the utmost sense of separation. But the irony is that you can never be separate, because in order to have an illusion of separation, you need to have oneness. Because you can only experience separation if you are one. So then, the act of separation, or let's say the act of the illusion of separate consciousness, so ego to the extreme, makes you conscious of the opposite. Of acting from union, of acting from compassion, of acting from higher intelligence. So when you look at the world right now, and you see right now what's going on politically and so on, you will come to an understanding that there is a catalyst being offered to humanity. So what you see in the outside world is a representation not only of your individual consciousness, but of the collective consciousness. And when humanity, deep down on soul level, desires change, it might need on the manifestation of space-time and physical reality a villain. So is that villain truly evil? Or is that villain there to make you conscious of what you have not been choosing? So let's say that villain wants to take your freedom away. What does the villain make you conscious of? That you have a choice to choose freedom. So, in that sense, does that make you more aware? Or are you also playing the game of power? You see? So, duality doesn't serve a soon-to-be master. In that sense, it is a distraction, because if we speak of life, in that sense, as a multi-dimensionality, layers of intelligence, then those who are supposed to come into wisdom also need to understand that the illusion of evil, that the act of tyranny, is something that can also increase you in awareness. That doesn't mean you accept it, and that doesn't mean that you are obedient, but it makes you aware of what you could choose instead. While the ego wants to make a separation by saying this is evil and this is not me, I put it outside of us, and we're not having a look at that, we say it's outside of us. On a deeper level of intelligence, we realize that everything that happens to us in this present moment right now is also our own creation. And that we can use no matter what happens as a catalyst. At some level of realization, you might choose to not expand any further through, let's say, the concept of good and evil that you have been using before. You might say, I'm done with that. I want to see everything from oneness. I don't want to see it from a fragmented perspective. And then you see that everything that we perceive as evil is an imbalance in the energies, in the systems, in the intelligences that are communicating. So if someone acts from separation and accumulates a lot of energy, so to speak, right, there is an imbalance. Now we become conscious of that imbalance because it creates suffering, right? So in that moment we become conscious of it, we can choose to heal that imbalance. So is the tyrant that we perceive as evil, why is he there? Well, he's there because we have not consciously chosen to be a creator. We have created unconsciously. The tyrant might have given us a belief, right? And we have integrated that belief into our brain, into our nervous system, and now we're acting it out. So we're creating his design. But we're actually co-creating with him. We just don't want to know that. We want to blame the tyrant for it all. But the tyrant couldn't create his tyranny if we wouldn't secretly consent to that. So when the tyranny makes you suffer on a subjective level, you see, and you want to transcend it, you need to, in that sense, recall your consent and choose to be a creator consciously, not unconsciously, not through some sort of programming or teaching that you have received from someone else, but to choose your reality and start manifesting that. So when we try to fight evil, what are we doing? We are investing in evil, you see. We are investing in the ego illusion. Right? You see, if you are part of an empire, you're fighting some people in a foreign country. You think you bring them civilization, right? You're the good one, right? From their perspective, you look like the intruder and the terrorist. And the ones who are fighting you there then, they feel like freedom fighters. And from their perspective, you are the evil empire. So who is good, who's evil? Are not both limited perspectives? Are not both perspectives of separation, and aren't both participating in the game of separation? So, for the soon-to-be master, this sort of belief is not of service. What the soon-to-be master needs to focus on is self-realization. And that means to fully restore yourself to your highest intelligence. So you can operate from a multidimensional perspective and not be trapped in a limited physical dimension. This limited physical dimension is the ego's playground. And in And when you're trapped in that perception, you believe in good and evil. And when you believe in it, you attract it. You attract the game of good and evil to yourself. And you also co-create it. So, in order to know oneself and to know that you have choice, you sometimes need the illusion of evil to become self-aware. When we think again about Star Wars, about Return of the Jedi, where Luke Skywalker has the chance to strike down his father, Darth Vader, he chooses to not do it. He chooses to break the cycle of perpetrator and victim, so end the karma. But without his father as the antagonist, he wouldn't have come to that realization. So is there evil? Only from a limited perspective, and that is a thought construct. Whatever happens is there to make you conscious of the possibility of choice. You can choose sovereignty, you can choose freedom, you can choose love and compassion, or you can choose the game of limitation, the game of fear. In which any perspective that is other than your subjective perspective makes you feel endangered. And everybody who's not sharing your perspective, you see them as evil. And they see you as evil because you're not sharing their subjective perspective. To transcend all of this, we need to let go of the idea of good and evil and duality, because we are co-creating. All right. So in that sense, the greatest challenges in your life, where you face those who are acting from separation, they're not truly separate from you, they're just trying to perpetrate the illusion, to perpetuate the illusion of separation. They seek the governance of ego. So, in that sense, it's not about fighting that, because, again, that would be participating in the illusion of good and evil. It is about choosing consciously what to create. What does the ideal world look like? From a level of higher intelligence. This cannot be a world of separation. This cannot be a world where a Stalin decides you have to live in his idea of communism, or a Mao. This cannot be a world where someone for you decides that you have to live in a state of fascism. It needs to be a world of multiplicity, without violence, where everyone is allowed to create as long as it harms nobody else. And in such a world, the idea of good and evil cannot enter. Because when everybody creates and co-creates a world where there is diversity in expression, without any limitations, except, of course, you're not supposed to be violent to someone else. Then there are infinite expressions of consciousness, and they would coexist in a oneness. So you would get over the fact of preference. You see, many people confuse preference for the idea of good and evil. You see, if you prefer a certain art or a certain music, it does not make the perception that someone else has of a different type of art or a different type of music invalid. This is what they perceive as beauty, and this is what brings them joy. But the ego's perception is only the music I like is true music. Only the art I like is true art. You see? The ego will always perceive itself as good. And it will perceive other egos as evil. Because they choose to create a different reality out of preference. But if I can allow the preference of other beings, it is the end of violence. So instead of participating in the fear, instead of fighting evil, which again supports the idea of good and evil, we can choose to create our own reality. non-violently. And this will be the focus of the Master. Contemplate about that, my friends. Be well.